Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is exciting. We're near the finish line. In fact, we can see it. You're going to see a little bit more of it tonight. A lot of people spent a lot of hours over a lot of months to get to the point where we are, and there's still some more work to be done. I know it seems like we took some time off, but the design committee in particular, supported by several of the subcommittees, has worked through the summer, and you'll see the results of that. The amount of pro bono labor contributed to this project now runs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a wonderful asset that people in this room and others have contributed to the city, and it's certainly something that nobody could have afforded. So we're all grateful to the participants of this process. Before I turn things over to the mayor, I would like to introduce O'Brien's Director of Marketing and Special Event Catering. First of all, I want to say thank you, Lisa. And I want to thank you, Costas, who's the owner, for giving us the opportunity here tonight. And now, with no further ado, Mayor Buckley.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to say much, just a huge thank you to everybody that's in this room. It's amazing to see the energy is still as strong as it was in the beginning of this process. People want things to happen, and it wouldn't happen without all your hard work. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You know I campaigned on a park, not a parking lot. You are going to help us achieve that goal. I'm excited to see the consensus plan tonight. As you all know, the RFQ went out. Can you all hear me back there? The RFQ went out. And we got a lot of response from that. So it was very exciting to walk into that room and see that many people that are interested in making something beautiful happen in this town. And I know there's more people to come, so please, we need as many respondents to the RFQ as possible. So if you have any ideas or anything we can do to help with that process, please reach out to the Mayor's office. But this is exciting times. This is going to be fabulous. It is going to be a game changer for this city. It is going to be something that the rest of the world looks at, because we're combining so many different ideas here, aren't we? Resiliency, beautification, public space, parking, all those sorts of things that if you do it right, you make your town incredible. And so thank you for all your efforts to make this town even more incredible than it is. Thank you so much.
We are having minor technical challenges here. Oh, we're doing great. Okay. So, Leo, I'm going to have to ask you to, since you're at the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you, Robert Clark, and thank you, Mayor Buckley, and all of you we've got from the city. I see Susie Smith is here. We have Karen Brown from Historic Annapolis. We've got Karen's right there. We've got all kinds of people. Okay. There we go. So what you're going to work with us tonight on will be, let me just check make sure it's working. It's working. Can you talk a little closer? What you're going to be seeing tonight is the work of the entire City Dock Action Committee team. The teams reported out in May and June, and then over the summer, the design team, and they are here to my left, Leo Wilson, Michael Beatty, I'm looking at the son, Ted Shields, Jay Graham, Michael Dowling, is that Bryce? Bryce Turner, and Chris Schein, also Jay Schwartz and Craig Martin. They worked Craig is over here, both Martins. They worked all summer to take the ideas that they heard from all of you and integrate them into a diagram that represents, we call it a consensus plan, but it's really a consensus vision. So let's remember why we're all here. When we started this whole process, which was the end of March, what we talked about is we can do better. This is a sea of asphalt. And what the mayor talked about is we can do better. We can do better than a sea of asphalt, dilapidated buildings, and let's see if this will do it now, 52 days a year of flooding. So our mission has been, as a group, let's see, okay, I can see this is going to be, there we go. Our mission as a group has been to address the resiliency challenges that are existential for Annapolis, as well as to create a world-class public space. So what's the process been? Many of you have been directly involved in it, and many of you tangentially involved in it. We are, I'm sure I'm never going to get the pointer to work here. Aha, we are right here. We've had 4 City Dock Action Committee meetings. We've had extensive community outreach over the summer, as well as a huge meeting with over 225 people in May. And now we are looking at more outreach over the next 2 months to a lot of the parts of the city that haven't been as directly involved. And we are looking at a final City Dock Action Committee meeting in the end of November, end of October. Oh, God. So what's all transpired in that time? A whole variety of things. There's been the Burtis group, and I see Rodney and Grant in the back. They had an outreach meeting this summer. The community, where is my community character group? Community character, they're right here. The community character group has had surveys and a whole variety of outreach efforts. In addition to that, individuals, whether it be Ellen Moyer, Gary Jobson, have been writing articles. People like Karen Brown and where is Ron Jarishaw have been working to put together the materials from all of you. From the business group, I'm looking at Joe Rubino, who's been working directly with the businesses, as well as Schein with the City Dock businesses. So there's just been an incredible amount of effort. In the midst of all of this, we went to, in the summer, we went to the City Council, and then in the fall, we came back and went to the first meeting, September 5th, we went to the Planning Commission. So when we went to the Planning Commission, what we did was take what all of you have done. We talked to them about each and every one of the teams. We talked to them about the Maritime Group, water access. And I just see another one of our council people is here. Ellie is here, and Fred is here. Fred, you want to raise your hand? And am I missing any other council people? I think that's it for right now. So we talked to them about the need for water access. The businesses have done a lot of outreach, and we talked to the council and the Planning Commission about the fact that they would like to see the activities off-season. They would like to see them in flexible space so that the locals can actually participate. The programming group and community access group, the Planning Commission was very impressed with the ideas from your group about having not just programming along the lines that we've consistently had it at City Dock, but programming that'll invite the entire city, multi-generational, cultural opportunities. Burtis House was very specific. Let's keep Burtis House in the location it's in, and let's also look to Burtis House as a location for some of the future Harbor Master activities. Community character group, again, all of the expectations for a high quality of life downtown, and resiliency and flooding. The real message to council was, through implementation of the City Dock Action Committee strategy, it's not a plan, it's a strategy, you have the chance to start putting in the type of flood protection, resiliency protection that City Dock desperately needs. Parking group, council was very interested in the fact that the parking group came back with a cohesive parking strategy. Yes, we need to rebuild Hillman, which the city is out on a contract right now. I say a contract to request for qualifications right now. But we also, there are a variety of immediate actions that can take place to address some of the congestion is not really the only word, but also the maneuverability for people looking for spaces. And then last but certainly not least is the Financial Tools Group, which identified an approach to fund on an ongoing basis what would be around a $3 million a year debt service so that all of these improvements can take place. So what we heard from council and the commission was fantastic. The commission used the word blown away by your professionalism. Council talked about maintaining the momentum. People were very excited about each of the ideas, but basically they said, let's go forward and let's make sure we can make this happen. The city is taking action right now as we speak. They released a few weeks ago a request for qualifications. Dan Dees is here, who, as well as David Jarrell, who put that together, looking for the private sector to come in and recommend to the city the most cost-efficient, best approach for redoing Hillman, as well as the city dock. There will probably be a request for proposals put out sometime this winter, but they got a great initial response. There were about 50 or 75 people at that meeting. It was fantastic. So tonight, after you all listen to this group present, our designers and architects, we're going to ask each one of the teams, is this what you envisioned? Is this the city dock that we've talked about? Is this the city dock that is reimagined to be a place where you and your families want to come in the future? Is there anything we missed? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Michael Beatty, and he can talk with you about, there we go, about the context. Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm a developer from Baltimore, and over the last 25 years I've built about 7.5 million square feet along the waterfront. But here in Annapolis, I live here, it's my home, so I'm very protective of the area and I recognize the value that we have here. So when you get a bunch of design folks together to really start talking about the project and things, everybody wants to do something new, everybody wants to design something. And that's actually really fun, exciting, but in a situation like this, it's pretty dangerous. Because the reality is the first thing you have to do is look at what makes this place great. And that's the most important thing, what makes it great.
Can't hear you back.
Can you hear me back now?
Yeah.
So you really have to look at what makes the place great. And when you walk around this town, it's the stuff that you can't recreate that makes it great. I mean, you've got this fantastic waterfront, the kind of quirkiness of buildings as you go down along the waterfront, the historic nature of the buildings, the scale of the buildings, what's here. That's what makes it great. So first you have to really focus on those things to see what makes it really great and make sure anything you do doesn't negatively impact that. That's the critical first step. Then you have to go through before you start redesigning things, and you have to look at the things that are terrible or really don't work. But in looking at those things, there's different scales of that. There are things that literally are bad and could be just removed and will make things look better or work better. But then there's also things that maybe are bad, but they're not that bad. And at the end of the day, we don't have unlimited resources to rebuild everything, so you have to be thoughtful about it. So when you look at the images here, go back. Obviously, as talked about before, when you look at the images here, what you see is a lot of parking. You see a lot of waterfront area, but a lot of parking along the edge. As you go and look at the downtown area, we have a collection of great buildings at a great pedestrian scale, but still, as you walk around, what you see are the cars really kind of champion everything. The cars are almost the leaders of everything. Those cars, you can't really walk across the street as a pedestrian without getting hit by a car or getting challenged by a car. So the cars actually take the lead as opposed to the pedestrian. But you've got these great buildings around the area, you've got great waterfront to walk around, and you've got great things like these buildings here, which I personally just love. I love the juxtaposition of these two buildings together. And you have a lot of that. All through Annapolis, you've got these quirky buildings, these quirky things that create great sight lines. And if you just take a while and walk around the town, what you'll see is this is what adds character to the city. This is what adds character to the waterfront. And what we need to do is protect that and add to it. And be careful that we don't take away from that that's here that's really great. And things like along the waterfront here, you've got sidewalks. This is on the top right-hand side is the sidewalk that's across the street from the Mission Barbecue. And a lot of people looked at it and said, oh, we've got to replace that sidewalk. Well, that sidewalk really isn't terrible. It's 16 feet wide. It's pretty nice to walk along. The waterfront's on your right-hand side. Could it be better? Certainly it could be better, but it's not terrible. On the other side of the street in front of Stevens, it's about 12 feet wide, so it's smaller. But as you get down the street further, it gets really narrow. And at some points, it's about 3.5 feet from the tree well to the building. So those are areas you can certainly focus on. As you look at, when you walk around the area and start to see what's there, what you realize is if you just go there and don't think about what should be built, what's the new stuff that should happen, think about what could be taken away that actually is obstructing things. And if you do that and you walk around, what you'll see is there is a ton of stuff that over time has just ended up here. And each individual thing was done for a reason. But if you look at the image on the bottom left, right down here, that's actually the back of the electrical building. That building does more to block views of the waterfront than other buildings around the harbor. But what happens is as soon as it gets built, it becomes the trash location, so the trash cans go behind it. And as soon as that happens, more generators and pieces of electrical equipment go down to the left. If you look at the next building over, which is on the bottom of the slide, which is the harbor master's office, it has electrical equipment all along the back of it. And again, it just becomes feeling like junky. If you just stand down there, there's more signs, random signs, all kinds of stuff around that block the view of the waterfront and feel kind of trashy. There's great historic buildings around the outside, but there's a bunch of stuff that could just go away. If you look at the harbor master's office building, I think a lot of people have said, oh, that's a terrible building, let's take it down. And certainly there could be something better, but is that the first thing that has to happen? I would say no. I would say that there are other things where money could be spent. But again, it's starting to look at things to say, what can you take away, what can you improve? Things like telephone poles all over the place and wires do more to impede the view than creating spaces out there. So if you don't create great spaces, first it's starting up to take things away. And the last thing on this slide that I find interesting are the trash cans that we have here. I think they're almost historic. Not quite there. I think they're kind of 70s vintage, but they are pretty much the ugliest trash cans I've seen ever. We have some in Baltimore too. But little things like that, starting from that premise of saying, what is really good? Let's protect what's really good. Nobody else can create the waterfront that we have here. Other cities, other towns, we would love to do that. Nobody else can create a project that has the history of the buildings we have here and the pedestrian scale. All around this country, people are trying to recreate urban environments. We already have that here. We have a great walkable environment. We have a great walkable environment. We've got a great mix of uses. It can use some improvement and some tweaking here and there, but what we don't want to do is mess up the things that are really good or really great here. And then again, when you get back to the scale of the plan, what you do see here is just a lot of not only parking and asphalt, but a lot of green and a lack of green space. So before we start planning, the first thing was figuring out what we need to protect, the good things that are here, being thoughtful about that, thoughtful about what are the new things that can go in the site, and it's really green space. I mean, green space and open public space that can be for the folks that live here is what will be most important. And I think if you create spaces in an environment like this, that people that live here want to come and utilize, and they want to be down here, the tourists will like it just as much. So you don't have to build things that are really focused on bringing tourists in. You have to build things that work for everybody that's here, and you'll create a great environment along the waterfront that will bring other folks in here. And getting rid of parking, creating more green space, opening up the view corridors. When you walk down right now and you walk along that sidewalk that I talked about across from Mission Barbecue, and you walk all the way to the end where the tour boats, the small tour boats go out of, you still can't see the waterfront because there is so much stuff sitting out in that parking lot blocking your view, you don't even know you're on the waterfront. If we open that up, get great green space, and lure you out there, that edge of City Dock can be the most incredible park space and really a great experience that's sitting in the middle of this neighborhood that will be for everybody that lives here in Annapolis as well as people coming to visit. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bryce Turner to start going through the plan. It's a great starting point and a great area to move forward with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael has been a real inspiration to all of us on the design committee. He's not an architect, he tells me, but he comes from a family of architects, and he really is great at putting together this context and really getting us to think a little bit more sensitively about some of these things. And he's really very good at that. Two things I want to say up front. One, we're all volunteers here on the design committee, as all of you are as well. We hope you're going to like the things we've done since you saw it in the spring. If not, you can fire us. Second thing is, this this parking lot that you see here is tremendous for cars. It's really good for cars. It's great for tents and it's great for the boat show. It's great for certain things, but it's not great for people. And it's a real heat sink. I mean, it's incredibly hot there. We need shading out here. We need a lot of other things. So we're going to scroll through some slides and just let you see some of our thinking, how we got to where we are. I'm going to quickly show you the plans we showed you in the spring, okay, just to refresh your memory. And we started with the waterfront as it was in the 1800s. You might remember some of these. And just with the point being that it's changed over time. The bulkhead has changed over time, and the buildings around it have changed as well. We found this photograph, which I think is what, the 1890s. There's a lot of blocking of views going on there, I think you'd admit, and there's a reason that changed. I mean, people found that these uses around the harbor, while they were important and they were about commerce, you know, ultimately these things did change. Here's another one from 1915. The harbor's come a long way. Better in some respects. 1921, it changes again. And then this is more or less our current configuration, a diagram of that current configuration. And I'm sorry I'm blocking your view, I just realized, if you want to pull up. So again, as you can see, we know the condition that is there. So we wanted to use this as a reference to think about what happens when we have a flood. When we have a flood like we did 15 years ago and we get up to elevation 8 with water, you see how much we lose of the town, and we've got to address this issue. We're fortunate to have some very passionate people here who understand a lot of these resiliency issues, and Zoe's going to talk about that in a few minutes. So our new plan for City Dock really starts with a couple of these big picture desires I want to remind you. Number one, when we had the ULI tap here, there was a tremendous amount of discussion about people being able to get to the water's edge, to dip their toe in the water if they dared. And so this is the idea is to create a promenade. This is a goal, to have a promenade someday that goes all the way around the harbor. We know that there's some challenges with that in the short run, and we'll work around that. You'll see that we've come down Newman Street with a walkway. We think that's a great opportunity ultimately for a brick sidewalk. But we love the idea of being accessible along the entire waterfront. And unfortunately, this plan doesn't show the Naval Academy, but even to the extent that we can, you know, get really adjacent to the Naval Academy and maybe even take some land back, that would be great. We'll talk about that later. Green space. Green space. We know how important it is to have green space here, and so this is where we first started outlining where we could put in green space. We know that we have to reserve some parking and keep some parking at City Dock, absolutely, but we thought this would be an opportunity. We think there are opportunities to expand the public space next to the market house, and while this is all shown green right now, it will really be more paved in public space perhaps, but we think there are a lot of opportunities, and Leo's going to talk about some of those coming up. We also have talked about reducing the footprint of the Harbor Master building. You know, we think that that building is a little too big, a little too clunky, and while it's, as Michael said, it may not be the top priority to move it, but some of those locations, some of those uses we think could go to the Burtis House. And you also see in some of these plans some ghosted in structures there that are former buildings that were there that we thought could be interesting to have a skeletal memory of those buildings and provide some shade and canvas for City Dock. Then again, the pedestrian experience, retaining some of the existing parking. And actually, since this plan was done, we actually think we can save a little bit more of the parking even than what you're seeing there now. And as Michael said, it's 16 feet along the north side of the water there, and it seems to be adequate then. It just all kind of falls apart when you get to the Harbor Master House. Resiliency, Again, we'll talk about that some more soon, but that black dotted line is one thought about where the flood barrier can go to protect downtown, and at least this zone, from rising seawaters. And that line has changed a bit. You'll see in the plans that we share in a few minutes. Programming. You know, the great opportunity to do all the things at the harbor, at City Dock, that we want to see happen there. Festivals, entertainment, you know, recreation, games, gatherings. And so this was kind of our consensus diagram in the spring, in March, where we kind of brought all those elements in. We're starting to suggest some of the activity that can happen at City Dock. So a couple of examples, some of which I shared with you before. This is a nice promenade, but it's not really Annapolis either. It's a little too large, but it certainly is a nice paved area, but not exactly Annapolis. These kind of images are more the scale that I think we're talking about here. Indeed, one of them, which is, what do we call it, the Under the Stars, Dinner Under the Stars, which was actually here on Main Street. But you know, that type of fun could be great. Landscaping, seating opportunities, we know we want some of that. Any opportunities to get grass and a little bit of shading to help cool things off will be important. These steps have been important, and we've talked about a few times, the opportunity to use those to allow some of them to flood as we have a flood event, and to still keep the heart and soul of the City Dock and some of those raised areas. And that's what we think will be important here. So this is the consensus diagram that we're currently working with. And so I want to talk about a couple of aspects of this plan. And especially the first thing we'll look at is the green space that we are proposing at the end of City Dock. We've increased the green space obviously significantly. Campbell Park is here, and this is not meant to be a final design. We need some landscape architects to help us with this, to refine it, and that will come in a latter phase. But it would be great to talk to the Campbell family about what could we do with the park at the end of the street here? What can we do to make Campbell Park relevant again? It works pretty well for certain events now. But could we get a little more shading? Can we have more weddings there? Can we get a little bit of green space there? The major park that you see just here is a raised park. It's up at about elevation 7 or 8, so it's about 5 feet higher than the edge of City Dock now. We want to create a stepped situation where you gradually get up to that so it doesn't feel like a wall or a barrier at all. And it will have a crown to it. So at the top, it will be the highest, and it can crown down on either side, another foot or so at least, to transition it back down a little bit towards the streetscape. Again, you have the steps that will wrap around the corners here. You see a little bit of shading that we're suggesting there, perhaps as part of those ghosted buildings that we talked about. There's an opportunity for water here as well. This is the kind of the remnant of the Harbor Master House, and we think there's a way to reduce that building in scale, keep some of the expensive utilities that are attached to the back of that building, perhaps still have the visitor center in that building, but move some of the other Harbor Master features and functions over to the Burtis House and to a new structure adjacent to the Burtis House, where it has a pretty good view of the harbor. You'll notice that in this area, as Michael said, in front of Stevens, you know, that's part of the quirky character of Annapolis. And it's really not that bad there. We get some parking, we need accessibility here, and that we would like to introduce some new green space, just a couple of trees to help define that area, a little bit of shade, screen the cars a little bit, and we think that that parking area can actually work out quite well. The dashed area again is where we're showing the flood barrier. That line will change. I actually think the line really is going to go down the middle of the park up here, probably will be the highest elevation at elevation 8 that will prevent floodwaters from getting further than that. We want to tie into the Naval Academy's flooding plans as well, so that we have a cohesive barrier. We want to talk some more about this space here, and I'm going to ask Leo to come up and talk about that space around the circle. But you'll also notice here, this is currently city parking. We think there's an opportunity to make that perhaps at least permeable, or you know, some type of maybe not grass, but at least something that's a little softer than just the asphalt that's there now. Some additional trees. Newman Street becomes a paved access, so that as you walk around City Dock, you can come down Newman Street and circle back up Compromise Street, or continue down towards Eastport. Those are some of the more critical aspects of this plan. I also just want to mention, you'll notice just to the north of the park, in front of what's currently Latitude 38, we'd like to make that a kind of a plaza space that has restricted vehicular access. And the idea is that it's available for fire trucks, it's available for deliveries, but we really want to discourage cars from going in there. There is the opportunity still to get some parking spaces. Maybe it's valet parking for the restaurant in front of that building. But we really want to try to reduce as much as possible the access through that area. And we see that as a paved plaza. Community functions can spill right over into that space. We really see this as the primary Uber, Lyft drop-off right there at the end of the paved asphalt. And I really believe that this kind of a park is going to change the character of City Dock and make a huge difference. And I think we're all going to have to give a little bit. It's not going to be quite as convenient in a few ways, as I mentioned before, but I think it's going to make a huge difference. Very important for the city, and could be really transformational. And I really believe that, transformational into how this is perceived by the public and how it is used by the public. So Leo, if you want to come up please and talk about the market house and that area and the circle, appreciate it.
Okay. Bryce, thank you. Does that sound all right?
No.
Right now? I'll try and keep it close. So my name's Leo Wilson. After I talk a little bit about the part that we focused on, Chris is going to talk about some of the area near the market house. And so one of the questions that came up several times during the discussions through this process is the circle. What are we going to do with the circle? And if you can remember back to when the City Dock Master Plan was developed. Sure. How's that?
We got to speak up.
How's that?
That's
Yeah. Gosh, I'm sorry. So, so when we were looking at the area of the circle, remember the City Dock Master Plan included an alternative for a T intersection there. Everyone remember that?
Yeah.
And so we initially thought the T made a lot of sense and would solve some problems over there. And of course, you go back out to the larger group and ask whether or not that's a good idea. And the resounding answer we heard pretty loudly was, that's a hard no. And I think there's a couple of good reasons for that. One of them is it's a pretty clear link to our past. The circle has been there for a long, long time. And so we started to think about, well, what's the real problem with the circle? And the circle is not the problem. The problem is the conflict between the pedestrian experience and the automobile experience that happens in this entire precinct. And anyone who's been there on a Saturday trying to get through on a car when there's that on and off flow of pedestrians across the area, they can see how impossible it is to navigate. So we took a harder look at this and we said, well, let's look at the possibility of leaving this circle as it sits today, and let's look at the areas around this circle and see where we're really having the problems. And the problem is that there are 3 and 4 lanes of traffic in some areas around the circle. Some of them are almost 5 by the time you figure out what's really left. And so what we did is we tried to look at an opportunity to increase areas for pedestrians to move around the circle. So let me see if my mark works here. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of no man's land right now, right? Like there's no way to cross that safely. And it kind of starts back here, and you really don't feel safe till almost over here, right? So we decided that there's really, and it goes to 1 lane up here, right? When you come off the circle to go up Main Street. So what if we pitch this up a little bit and force people into more defined lanes that could still allow the through flow of traffic without interruption and provide more opportunity for green space and pedestrian space around the circle. So you'll see there's a larger green space here. We don't know what we're going to use that for yet other than not cars. And the same here, you know, I would like to be able to cross the street here and have a spot to brake so I don't have to kind of do the gauntlet across here. It's like Frogger, I guess. You kind of have to move back and forth and hope. So adding kind of a little more green space around here and opportunities for pedestrians to safely kind of move around this area, I think will change it quite a bit. Now, I'm going to move to the Mills area here too. Again, this is a big kind of no man's land here, and I don't think we need all of that asphalt. So what we've done is we've tried to pull the curb line out, and anyone who's walked along here, I'm sure everyone has, it's tight. You get in front of the restaurants and Mills, it's not much room. If I could put some more room out there, I could have an opportunity for more pedestrian activity. You could have a restaurant with seating outside. Some other fun stuff could happen there, and then even around the corner, we could have some more nice pedestrian space too, and a safe way to cross back over to Ego Alley. So I'm still maintaining all of the parking over here, almost all of it. The intent would be to use this area for loading in the mornings and try and control the loading a little better, because it's kind of chaotic down there right now. You go there at 10 in the morning and there's no room for cars. There's trucks everywhere. They're stacked in here. So the green space up here I think will really help, but the function of this circle will remain as it is today. Now, I want to talk about this area behind the market house here. We know we need the loading, right? So we're going to maintain loading here during the morning hours. This is really quite wide back here. So we are proposing to narrow this down a little bit, which we think would work. Improve this park area here. This is one option of what it could be, right? We could have this open green area. Certainly, as Bryce explained, these are just placeholders. This needs to be designed. But right now we're saying there's more opportunity over there for a friendlier space. It's not bad, we can make it better. Back here, we think that we could use this for expanded kind of people space, I'll call it. So yeah, cars come through here and turn through here, but that doesn't have to be there that way all the time. I can still come from Eastport, go past the academy, I can go up through here, but this could be closed off for event space. That could be used for art shows, that could be used for expanded use from both the market house on this side after loading is complete and also the businesses over here. So if we think just a little bit differently about how this space is used, then we might be able to get more use out of it for people and less for cars. We're sensitive to the fact that the cars are still a problem and we're going to have to deal with them. So these spaces are in flux, much like the space in front of the Latitude 38. That can be used for different things at different times, and we'll figure out how to use those together. But I think these are nice opportunities now with the market house working pretty nicely to change the character of these spaces. And then Chris is going to talk a little bit more about connectivity and trying to control and provide connections from one spot to another that work a little better than they do today. It wasn't that long ago that we had police officers there on the weekend to help us figure that out. I'm not sure what happened to that, but it's kind of, I mean, it sure would be nice to have them right now. In lieu of having them back, if we could control the points and give pauses between the two, I think we might do a little better. So I think I like the circle a little better. I hope everyone else does. I think the additional green space and a little less car space is something we can probably live with. And looking forward to some input on these ideas, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about the connectivity.
Well, thanks for showing me how. There, I got it on the first time. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Schein on the CDAC Design Committee, and I think that some of the things that I'm going to talk about really have been touched upon by everybody that presented. And I'll just advance this slide. So this is not nearly as sexy a slide, a diagram with some dots on it, but just to run you through and maybe summarize some of the key components. It's connectivity, but it also relates to other things like retail and commerce and the importance of streetscape to retail. But the notion that, and is this the pointer? Sorry, which one is it? There we go. To pick up on the circle, I think that Leo did a great job summarizing how we got to preserving the circle, but maybe modifying it. But what that does do is leave us sort of with a connectivity issue. Maybe to just jump on that again. I remember when we had crossings here, we had crossings here, we have had crossing there. Now we have chains. It's changed over the last 25 years. Sorry, but you can't see, so I'll stand back and try to be skinnier. Yeah. So I think that it's really critical if the circle stays. What Leo is saying here is by adding and expanding these landscape areas, you're also providing the opportunity for more pedestrian crossings and a place to get halfway across and wait and go. And this really is a management issue from the city's perspective, but right now we don't have all these crossings, right? And we need more, because basically if you don't cross here or down here, you have to go all the way to the corner to cross, and it just keeps everybody from getting down here, and it keeps everybody from getting down here. So that's to start. The second big move is you'll see these red dots, and really the reason they're red here is that this is really the streetscape that interacts with the buildings and the businesses in Annapolis, right? These are retail, mostly establishments, and in most cases, Annapolis is pretty restricted. In some places it's wide enough, but it works well enough. There are other places where it's really quite wide, in front of Goodies and over by Starbucks, where you just get a lot more activity because the sidewalks are wider. But where it starts to kind of disintegrate, and Michael, I think he did a great job of saying, this is pretty good. 16 feet wide works pretty well for Annapolis. But as you go down, it gets skinnier and skinnier and skinnier, and it just disappears. And so this is not only important for pedestrians to get to the waterfront and get to the newly utilized Burgess House and to the park, but it's also important for those business establishments to be able to utilize that streetscape for either cafe seating or whatever that may be. So it's more than connectivity, it's really good for business. Secondly, I think Bryce did a good job talking about the waterfront promenade, and Michael was mentioning that this width here is really pretty good. It works pretty well. Once again, it's once you get halfway down the city dock that it really just starts to fall apart, and we have the boardwalk where it's very thin and at different elevations. So our plan really is just to improve that, to make that just as wide and make that continuous and carry it as far as we can. The rest of the yellow is really just the interstitial pedestrian connectivity through to the waterfront. We're just really trying to re-emphasize, let's get to the waterfront in all directions. And again, the raised park, if it's raised, we'll have to have ramps. So this really works out well. On this side, we have there's really an opportunity for a ramp at the end of this segment to take you straight up to the raised lawn. And there's an opportunity on this side to ramp up from latitude 38 and from this flex space to get up. And then we would then propose stairs. And again, this all needs to be designed in the future, but accessibility is really important, obviously, to this public space, both from a handicap accessibility, but just a pure accessibility standpoint when you raise things 5 feet up in the air. So I think that really is, and the last thing, of course, is the Newman Street and the importance of that connection back here. We think that'll be a huge improvement, just to make that a nice pedestrian corridor. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
is Zoe Johnson, and I'm representing the Resiliency Work Group, and I just wanted to start by saying it's a real pleasure to be able to present to you after the consensus plan drawing, because the Resiliency Work Group met very early on in the process with the Design Work Group. We sat around a table and really shared with the Design Group our resiliency planning guidelines. When you plan for resiliency, you have to think about resiliency as a thread that's really needs to be sewn throughout a planning process, when you're creating the vision, but then as you begin to develop the strategy for executing that vision, and then on a project-by-project basis as you implement individual, elements of your projects or your strategies. And so, we feel that, and I think you can probably see it tonight, that the design group did a nice job of taking the resiliency planning principles that we presented to this work group back in May and integrating those into the design. They integrated concepts associated with urban heat and heat island effects. They incorporated environmental sensitive design in terms of looking at impervious pavers to help control stormwater flooding and make softer, greener spaces for people and animals and the environment. They looked at both long-term impacts associated with coastal flooding, that we know that we're subject to sort of episodic or periodic coastal floods at any given time. But we also know that as sea level continues to increase, that those flood levels can reach higher, and that we see on a day-to-day basis that we're vulnerable to nuisance flooding. And so all of the elements that we provided, that the Resilience Group provided to the design group, they've integrated in. We talked about both passive and automatic floodgates, where you can build in staged elevation increases, looking for ways to make sure that pedestrians and the citizens and boaters and recreators can still interact with the water while making sure that we're protecting the assets and our community at the same time. So, there are examples of flood retention systems and examples of communities that have done this type of planning and integrated concepts associated with, economic revitalization and resiliency around the world. And also throughout the country. And so I think that what you've seen is a really good start. They call it a start, and I think it really helps us as a city think about how to move forward with continuing to incorporate these design principles and build resilience to future storms. So I would just say that am I going the wrong way? So there are 3 opportunities to build resilience in a community, to think about planning for future impacts associated with storms or hazards or climate change. And one is good, one is bad, and one is really ugly. And so these diagrams that you see up here were all part of the Rebuild by Design competition that was held after Hurricane Sandy. Some are up and down the Atlantic coast, and some are illustrations, some are visualizations, and some have actually been executed. But the opportunity, the good, I'll start with the good, and that is that we're at a good place to think about how to incorporate resiliency and adaptation planning into the city dock. We're not facing an impending storm. We have an economic development opportunity, potentially through the RFQ and an RFP to follow. And we can really sit back now and think about how to incorporate resiliency and build a better, more resilient project that's going to protect future investments, but that can also allow us to continue to recreate and use that space as we want. The bad example is, after Hurricane Sandy or after Hurricane Isabel, where you want to build resilience in, and you want to plan and rebuild to a higher standard, but you don't have that vision, you don't have that plan. So the fact that we have a plan and that we're working to implement that vision and recommend a vision through this work group, I think is a real opportunity for the city. The ugly is where you continue to build and rebuild and you're damaged time and time again from a storm, and you keep building the same thing in the same place in the same way and not learning from your mistake and not using that either a process like this or recovering from an episodic event as an opportunity to rebuild, so and to create a new future. So there are many ways to go about this, and I think the design group has done a nice job at laying out and incorporating the design principles, and we welcome your comments like the other work group is moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, just a few more slides here that we wanted to share, and then we want to get your feedback on some of this. But first, this is what we have today. We've talked about it a lot, and this is just one three-dimensional kind of view of what we think City Dock could look like. We've said it many times. This is just, you know, one option. It's a bit of a placeholder. It's a diagram, consensus, but everybody wants to see some kind of visualization, and this is really it. And so I just wanted to mention a few things here. We talked about Susan Campbell Park and how we could green up some of that and working with the family to understand some of the goals there that could happen. We talked about the upper raised part here, which has its steps that wrap around and provide an opportunity for seating as well as for some control of flooding. The opportunity for some shading up here as well on top. And I know that this tree plan is not meant to be a final configuration, but we do think it needs some green space.
And Bryce,
yeah.
just a shout out here to the boat show. The dimensions here were all of the boat show's drawings that they gave us were incorporated to make sure that they had the width and the dimension that they needed.
Right, there is room to for the boat show to be laid out here in a very reasonable way, we think, and it should be better than ever. You know, the existing parking that we're going to have here with a few new trees that help to shield some of that, provide a little more shade as well. Wrapping around Ego Alley here, we think there's also an opportunity for a few more trees here, which we didn't get into the rendering yet, and we'll continue to tweak this a little bit as we develop our final report. But also I just want to talk about a few other things, and this is that kind of plaza space in front of Latitude 38 where the yacht club was temporarily. This space here along the waterfront, and Michael Beatty reminded me, and I said seriously actually, that if the Naval Academy could move the gate and not give up any land, but if they could move the gate so that we could at least have this north portion of this waterfront here, it would really make a difference to that dinghy dock area currently, and it would really be fantastic and allow us to control and clean up some other things. Currently, there are a tremendous number of electric panels and things in here that block your view and block your access right on the edge of the water, and that would be a great place to change that. So this gives you some idea of what we're talking about, the continuous promenade and all the other attributes, and I really think it could be a wonderful transformational event here in Annapolis. So let's keep working hard to make it happen. We want to get your feedback, and I thought I would start with just asking if there are any specific questions about this. Not so much comments yet, if you don't mind, but because we want people to formulate comments in their groups, but questions technically about any of the things we proposed.
Can I just say one thing? When I spoke, I forgot to thank the most important person, Robert Clark, and anyone from Historic Annapolis. Could you please stand up, because we wouldn't be here without you. So. Thank you so much. Thank you.
One back here.
So have engineers been consulted about what we can put on City Dock? Because it's sort of held together by rebarb and there's a lot of infrastructure underneath of it, and we're trying to add weight to it. Is this even possible?
The answer is it is possible.
Yes.
I'm an architect, I'm not an engineer, but I don't think that's going to be near the top of our list of issues that we'll have to deal with. It's certainly important, but I think we'll be able to deal with that one relatively easily. It may help stabilize the soil, we may have a lot of compaction going on, but that's going to be important. Yes, right here actually.
Between late spring and early fall, we get about 1,000 buses that come down to City Dock. How are they going to be able to be there? And where do they leave when they leave the City Dock?
We're encouraging buses to come down, drop off here, and continue out and around.
On Prince George Street?
Well, or make this turn right around the end of that parking area, which is a fairly large turnaround area.
Except that sometimes you get a clump of about 6 or 8 or 10 buses at once.
Yeah, and I mean, this is going to be one of the areas where we're going to need some traffic control and some help. I mean, this is going to be it's a busy area. There'll be fewer cars perhaps right there, but we understand the importance of it. It's a very highly trafficked pedestrian zone, and it's going to require some control, just like every great waterfront community has to deal with.
Has the city allowed for this extra control, for
I think we want to
that's beyond our scope, I think, right now, I'd say.
I was just going to ask.
We would want to discourage buses from parking there with their engines on and waiting there. So really, and the blocking of the sight line, the combustion, all that sort of stuff would obviously be better removed.
But obviously there's going to be more public transportation from where to get to where we want to be in the city.
I think it's, I think we're relying more and more on Ubers and drop-offs. I think people are walking more and more. If they can park their car and walk, I think most people are happy to do that.
But you're like looking at the stadium from walking through there. I don't know where the general parking would be that you take away from this parking. Where is that parking going?
Adding capacity.
Adding capacity to Hillman Garage, as well as using some of those other remote locations. There's plenty of other garages up West Street that are underutilized.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, if I make 2 points to Mr. Hillman's point, when you have the 6 and 8 school buses and tour buses that drop off and they know they're coming back on in an hour, they used to just hang out down there. So now if we have them drop off, where do they go? I live on Duke of Gloucester and St. Mary's. Trust me, that's where they're starting to park. They're already starting to park there. All of a sudden you see these limousine buses and the guy's asleep in the front seat and he's taking up 5 parking spaces. So any plan that deals with taking away space where they historically used to just hang out, either they have to be required to go to stadium or to a designated space, because otherwise our small streets absorb that.
Yes, I think an issue that's important to remember is the large majority of these buses are tied to the Naval Academy. And what transpired after, I think 1,200 of them are, what transpired after 9/11 is that that area was closed. And I think one thing that, we've talked to Robert Clark and the mayor about is really starting over the next several years to work with the Naval Academy to figure out a better solution, because this solution has not historically worked.
And I think there are a tremendous number of procedure and policy control issues like we're talking about that have to be dealt with. But it is the design and planning committee's opinion that buses need to drop off and go somewhere else.
Right.
And that somewhere else is going to be outside of this immediate district. And I think you find that to be the case in Newport. I think you find that to be the case in a lot of waterfront communities, because there's places that you want to give to people. The buses sit and pollute the air while they sit there and run their engines and block views. And so really they need to drop off and move.
Actually,
yeah. So
the question I did have had to do with the elevated platform that you have designed. How will that, will it obstruct any views of the water when you're higher up at Market, Fleet, and that area?
No, it won't, because it'll be up about 4.5 to 5 feet, and that's really generally. And when you're up standing at elevation 8 to 9 to 10 or 11 and looking out, you'll be looking over elevation 8. So
you'll actually have a much better view Because right now, if you stand, you see cars, this will basically put you essentially on the roof of the car.
Oh, yeah, when you're standing there, but I was talking about if you are at Market House, does it obstruct any of the water?
No, that's a good question, but it won't. I mean, at 5 feet tall, you know, we will all be able to see over a 4-foot mound, and it's, you know, it's going to change things a bit, but removing the Harbor Master House or a portion of it will make a difference. I mean, look, let's face it, it's all these other things down there, like buses that do block a lot of views currently. Yes.
I'm curious why the 5-foot platform in the middle of the design there. You didn't quite explain that.
Because of resiliency and the...
Why is it 5 feet and it is tied directly, the 5 foot 3 inches is tied directly to the flood needs?
Did you trace on there where that starts and ties into the Naval Academy wall and ends up? Or is it just it looks in the rendering like a separate 5 foot tall platform with steps going down on all sides?
Well, what's going to happen is the park in the very middle will be the highest point of the park, and then it'll crown down on either side. And this has not been designed or engineered yet, but the possibility that we see is to then tie immediately here to the Naval Academy, and whether or not the Naval Academy is going to bring it in right on the water's edge, which I believe they probably are. Is that correct, Zoe? So it's going to be tying in right on the water's edge and make that connection here around the Burtis house. We see the Burtis house being raised up probably as well in order to facilitate that change.
Are all the streets going to be raised?
Not all the streets, no. And really it's just going to be this new public space we're building in here where the changes will happen. We feel an obligation, of course, to provide the same street elevation adjacent to existing buildings. We can't block anyone's access to their building.
Maybe take one more question
to be more
because we've
resilient.
got to then break out into the team so they can do their work. We've got a couple of questions. Two back here.
If I can,
Okay.
may I ask, what is the negative impact on parking directly affected by this design?
Well, we're looking for a net zero change in parking, but it will be relocated from here.
To Hillman Garage.
To Hillman Garage, as well as West Street.
Is it your experience that people park on West Street and walk down here?
Yes, or, I think shuttle opportunities of some kind will be required.
I think the issue is the timing and what the city has very wisely done. They have gone out with this request for qualifications, and their intention is to address Hillman Garage immediately so that that parking issue is addressed, and then the next phase would be the city dock. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I could say that the RFP will sort of talk about 700 spaces. We need 700 spaces. So I think there'll be a net gain in the garage, but we will build a garage in such a fashion that the top 2 or 3 floors can be converted, this is what I would encourage, can be converted to offices or apartments in the future when there's a lot less cars. But we know that's 10 years away or 20 years away. So there'll be actually added capacity of parking, because we can't really talk about any of these changes, any addressing Main Street or addressing anything we've learned until we add capacity.
Yes.
With the Newman Street extension that you have on the other side, that's often flooded. Is there an elevation component there as well? Because it's impassable a lot of the time, where you're talking about bringing Newman Street down to Ego Alley.
Yeah, that's a good point. The pumping engineering solution that's happening currently is going to help that to some extent. This has to tie into that to avoid that. And exactly how we deal with it right at Newman, I'm not sure, but I think it's solvable. Leo, do you have any other thoughts about that? I'm not sure we've really solved that or thought about that much further, but there are a number of ways that can be done.
And last question, Ellie.
Yes, hi. Bryce, could you speak to your philosophy, other than our property ownership, on why you focused on the public space and not the adjacent retail Was it a placemaking philosophy or what have you?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, we were working with city-owned land. And everything we're doing is on city-owned land. I think that obviously property owners have, the right to have access to their property, and we're not looking to change the immediate sidewalk in front of each building. We would hope and encourage property owners to upgrade sidewalks, facilities, buildings, all of that, of course. But from a placemaking perspective, it's absolutely critical that the public realm be a place where you really want to go. And we're trying to make that a place. And you've got to admit, I mean, that is, even in this form, it is a much better place than what's there today. And it would make an incredible difference in terms of a lot of things. One being resiliency, the other being comfort and shading and temperature. And so that has really a lot to do with it. And that's been our philosophy.
This thing's frightening. So I just wanted to speak to that a little more because I think it's a really good question. And this process is about the ability to implement the next step. That's really what I think Annapolis is starving for. We've looked at this ad nauseum. I mean, I've lived here a long time, and we've had plans come and go. And I think one easy way to complicate that is to look for some way to involve a public-private partnership with adjacent property owners who have land and maybe have some desire to swap and trade pieces. And we saw how difficult that was to do at the 110 site when there was discussion about buying a part and selling some other part back to the city and re-dividing that, and it just went nowhere. Mostly because, as willing as both partners might be, the city didn't have the funds to do the trade, and the property owner didn't want to give anything up. So it becomes a one-way street to a stop. So the concept revolves around our ability to control every component of this. None of this is private property. All of this is public realm. So there's no side deals to make. There's no, I hope this works out with an adjacent person. This gives us the opportunity to move forward as a city with largely every component of it in our control. Now, we have partners that are very important. The boat show is a critical component to who we are and how we operate. So that has to be investigated carefully so they're not left short. But we also have an obligation to the people who live here to improve the experience down there, because it's not good today. So I think there's middle ground we can find to make both of those things work. But this is intended to set the stage for this RFP and RFQ. We've outlined where we think you have opportunities to do a better job. The goal here is to then hire professionals to come in and fine-tune this. At the same time, work on how specifically we're going to tie these resiliency measures into the academy and around all the way to Newman, and then what happens over there, because the water doesn't stop because the wall stops, right? Finds the end, right? So there are going to be a lot of open questions, but I think what we're trying to do is say this is how this group of people, after all this effort, have decided maybe a good way to respond to all of the concerns, and so that's where we sit.
So with that said, first of all, this entire team has done an incredible job. I would like to acknowledge that. They've been incredible to work with. It's been a real privilege. What I'd like to do now is take about no more than 30 minutes and have the teams meet with their fellow team members and see, is this the direction you wanted? Is there anything that was left out? Any other ideas? It's 25 after, so at 5 of 7, we will reconvene as a group and hear from each of the teams. And then, for those of you in Ward 1, we are talking to the Ward 1 Civic Association at 8 o'clock tonight at the Metropolitan. So thank you very, very much. Everyone's attention. We are going to start the reporting out with the Community Character and Livability team. Who's reporting out?
Mark. We're too shy.
We're too old, we can't get out. Except Hey y'all, Mark Millay. First of all, thanks to the team that presented tonight and put all the hard work into this. Pretty fantastic. This is all coming together. So from community character and livability, I think what we saw tonight really is that our work is very aligned with the physical placemaking update that this really is. And so what we want to offer are some suggestions that can be placed into the physical components, but also probably some programming things that need to be considered as we're talking about the physical additions as well. And this is really in no particular order. Number one, what we really would like the designers and the architects to strongly consider bearing utilities. We didn't hear that discussed tonight, and as we have all looked out at the view shed, really all we do see is overhead power lines. We think that's part of resiliency as well as maintaining the natural view shed of the water from up and down our town. Next, the crosswalks. We talked about this for a while, and as you remember during our updates, we encouraged the pedestrian vehicular team to really put a lot of energy into making the town more pedestrian friendly over car friendly, and we see that happening. We would just like to reinforce that. We would like to see the perhaps crosswalks, I know there's not much detail on this, but perhaps working the crosswalks into those green spaces that we see around the traffic circle as a way to interface the green space and make actual use of that rather than just relegating them as bushes in the bricks like the current traffic circle is. As well, what the public is going to ask is...
the plan. Yeah, just so you're...
Sure.
You can point to it.
Oh, absolutely.
I think I got it wrong. Try yours, see if that backs up.
Am I backing up too?
Right
there, right there. Well, I don't.
It's hard to see. Now you need the pointer.
Look at that. So these, what I'm talking about are these kind of new triangular shaped green spaces that you see ×3, and there are probably others around the area. But we were talking about the crosswalk plan. We see multiple of them. As we integrate the crosswalks into the new design, perhaps integrate the crosswalks through the green space and use, much like you see at the end of West Street nearby the Westin Hotel. That's a clever design that could give better use to the green space that is here, here, and here. As well, for those that are designing those, what we would like to hear is more detail on the signage. The current model of take your life in your own hands and play Frogger downtown doesn't work in this. So let's get, if the public is going to ask how that's going to be electronically regulated in all of these crosswalks, and yes, we know that's complicated. And no, I think no one wants a stoplight. However, what we do want is just more detail on what could potentially work to favor the pedestrian over the car safely in those locations. Next, heavy vehicular movement. In this design, as Bryce said, we have this movement, the movement of vehicles, be they buses or others, out back into the back alley of Prince George Street, and into this turn right here. What we heard from residents is just to do everything we can to keep heavy vehicular traffic and additional vehicular traffic off residential streets. And that goes to King George and Prince George, obviously. But in general, in anything we consider is how we can, via signage or other just routing, prevent those kind of vehicles from moving up those streets. Next. Public water access. This is more programming than physical infrastructure, but in the design as is presented, we didn't hear anything at all about how what is designed, the placemaking, will integrate public water access from the water to land and from the land onto water, with the emphasis on getting the public into the water. As well, there was a little kind of lip service to a potential fountain, but that is a huge thing as an amenity that we heard a lot in our discussions with the public.
The Fleet Reserve one night. Thanks, Fleet Reserve, for hosting everybody. And I would just say, my vibe, my personal take on what I think folks would like is I think folks generally like the circle. Leo was right on that they prefer that over the T, so I think that's a winner. I think probably need to do a better job of explaining the bus drop-off. There's so many buses that Mayor Hillman referred to that come down there, where they drop. And I think if they drop and go, that's fine. They don't need to be sitting there. But I think still the access, getting folks and visitors from out of town to City Dock, and they're not all Naval Academy buses, Eileen, but there's a bus access that I think needs to be refined better. And the issue of parking is always going to come up. I think generally speaking, the vibe I get from a lot of businesses are concerned, especially in the off months, January, February, March, where regional locals come down if it's not convenient to park. I think you mitigate that a long way when you say that'll be mitigated with Hillman. I think folks view that as easy walking distance. It's all kind of viewed as downtown. Once you start saying West Street or further, you start to lose them, because then they'll say folks aren't going to walk from West Street to the City Dock in January, February, or March, or they won't take a shuttle or go somewhere else. But if it's convenient and easy, I think most folks view Hillman as still in that realm. I think that works a lot. So I think those are the three kind of big takeaways, I think, from our group, from my sense of talking to folks.
Super, thank you. Mary?
Maritime?
Yep.
Oh, we really like the drawing. As I said, we had some things that we thought we would do a little bit different. We thought the boats would be side due there in Ego Alley. And we focused a lot more on sort of programming. We thought a lot about how people could come down to City Dock and experience the water. And we think that there are not enough opportunities to get out on the water for Annapolis City residents and for tourists. I think that Watermark and Woodwind do a fabulous job, and I think there's room for a lot more opportunities. And we had some great conversations with people who paddle and people who want to get out on the water. And I think there are safety concerns and there are access concerns, but I think there's really good opportunity. And the most important thing is if we can get more people to come to the end. You really stand on Main Street and you look at the boats way far out and you don't feel like you could be part of it. I think that if people are down walking all along, they're going to have a lot more opportunities. So we're very excited about this idea.
Thank you.
And we love that the boat shows are at the table, obviously. But I think the boat shows can be flexible if everybody's talking and working together on it. I mean, if it all gets redrawn without anybody talking the boat shows and the tents can't go up, then you can't have a boat show. But if everybody's talking about it and goes, hey, how about if we take the tents and we turn them this way? Well, that's awesome. So it's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean and Larry, finance, any comments?
I'll leave it to Larry.
Larry,
Well, we are kind of the...
where did the mic go?
Yep.
There you go.
Thank you. Is that working okay? Well, the finance team is kind of the dog wagging the tail. It's very important to have a plan of finance that can implement all of this that's being proposed. And we think we have one. And I'll just give you the principles of it. First, we think that this has to be implemented by a new public corporation. We don't think that this massive undertaking can be done within the existing city framework, city employees, and their scope of service that they're already responsible for. If we lay this big of a project on top of the city, Lord knows what would happen to all other city services and the distractions that this would cause. So we're proposing something like a 21st capital city development corporation to undertake the implementation of this project. That corporation would have full independence to wheel and deal as a private corporation would. The model that's in the back of our minds right now is the Maryland Stadium Authority. Maryland Stadium Authority, which I was engaged with many, many years ago, started out to build Oriole Park and then went on to build Raven Stadium. And then has probably undertaken 50 projects since then. Many of them public-private projects, many of them offline, off-balance sheet to the local governments that they're working for. And that's what we're envisioning here. So that there would be no financial burden on the city of Annapolis. All financial burdens would reside with this new corporation. Be totally off-balance sheet to the city. And how do you pay for it? Well, our thought is you just can't burden the city taxpayers anymore. They've had enough. It's a project whose size and scope benefits many, many, many people beyond the city taxpayers. And so we have to turn elsewhere for money. We want to see the city put up a few bucks. We want to see the state put in a few bucks. But the continuous stream of revenue that we hope we can tap to finance this would be the hotel tax. The hotel tax is not fully utilized at this stage of the game. We would propose something in the order of magnitude of a 1% increase, or a 1 point increase in hotel tax. Now 7%, we'd take it to 8 countywide, and maybe take it from 7 to 9 for hotels in the city. Order of magnitude, it's going to raise $3 to $4 million a year. We'd try and get that implemented as quick as we could, because when Hillman goes offline, you're losing $3 million a year to the city budget. And we would hope that we could, in the interim, use that hotel tax to supplant that, and then go further to sell bonds. About $50 million worth of bonds can be sold on a hotel tax that I'm speaking about. And sell those bonds, and they'll give us a lot of money to start this project with, and last for quite a few years. So those are the two concepts we're working on: an independent corporation for implementation, and using the hotel tax as an external source of revenue, all off balance sheet to the city.
Can I ask a question about that? In that math, you just said $3 million per year on an increased hotel tax, 7 to 8%, correct? Does your math include what we're all hoping for as well, which is a added tax on short-term vacation rentals in town?
No,
does that exclude that number?
I'm not even thinking in those
Just
terms.
making sure I understood what that
Not thinking in those terms.
Okay.
We're on a global page here, not on a local page.
Programming group. Take that over here.
Thanks. So when we started this process, we looked at who uses City Dock. It's multi-generational, it's a diverse crowd, and it's a mix of tourists and visitors. It's hot in summer, it's cold in the winter, there's not enough seating, there's not enough shading, there's too many cars. So we also wanted to keep what activity and programming happens down there right now. The art and public places, music and dance nights down there are extraordinarily popular. Movie nights, the Race Across America ends down there, the bands, the parades, the festivals, and there needs to be space to accommodate all that. So we started with what works, because everybody goes to what doesn't work right away. The walkway, we really like the perimeter walkway. That was something that we had talked about in our presentation. We like the steps, the plaza, like moving the parking, the covered spaces, because we talked about it, there was something that was somewhat covered. You didn't use it more not only in summer, but also it provides some protection in winter. And the market space, we really like. What we really found was missing, that we found in our presentation, our initial presentation, on the importance of multi-generational community engagement. And we don't see any of that here. Art and Public Places right now gets 300 plus people for music and dancing, and there's a lack of access down there for older adults, nor is that space that's paved right now enough to accommodate seating and dancing for 300. So if people are coming in from Baywoods, or they're coming from Manresa Atria, or they're coming from other assisted living facilities, where do those vans park? And we're not talking buses, we're talking vans, but there needs to be parking for these people, because that's the customer who's using it right now.
Joanne, you know, this is all what we call flexible space, but it would be space where buses with handicap, any of that, people can come right up here.
No, and we talked about how that space would be used, it just wasn't well defined. There's a lack of activities for small children. So if you're bringing 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds down there, what are they going to do? Yeah, we thought possibly instead of parking at the space in front of faucets, we really liked the green space there. Maybe that's a game park where there's oversized checkers or chess or something for children to do. We need a safe space for non-motorized boats. and possibly relocating the dinghy parking to, from the end of Ego Alley to allow for people to have access to the water. And there's a lack of heritage engagement. We were echoing sort of what you were talking about, that this is a historic waterfront. And how are we going to interpret that for people going down there? We thought potentially we've suggested this before, through seating and climbing facilities, so that there are interactive structures that are maritime related that could also provide seating or climbing or other entertainment. And we also echo the idea there needs to be engagement with the water. A fountain, a splash pad. Again, we like the idea of tying the water to the historic nature of this property, but that it needs to be unique for Annapolis, not just look like it could be in some place that doesn't have a historic maritime heritage. So there was a lot that we liked, but we need to see more to make sure that it's a really useful multi-generational space.
Great, thank you. Alex, your group?
All right. Hi, Ron Jaroshow. I've been working with the parking group. So the parking group generally endorses the idea of no net loss of parking spaces. As the parking is removed, you need to find spaces otherwise in the city. And we need to address mobility, people getting access to the park, access to the water, and thirdly, the component of financing. All those three things, from our point of view, needs to work together. You have to be able to integrate those three things as you design a plan. But many of the people from the parking side of our committee, because ours was parking, biking, and pedestrian focus, feel there's more of an information problem in the city than there is a parking availability problem. There is parking available a little bit further away. What we have is an information problem, getting people who are coming to the city who are able and don't have to park right on the city dock to be filtered off into the other parking areas. And so we have spent a long time focusing on information, that is information by websites, signage, other electronic access, cell phone access. So people who are coming towards the city can find out, oh, I can park here and it's only a half a mile walk. It's not that farther to walk from, let's say, the parking garage near St. John's or the Knighton garage versus the Hillman garage. Yes, it's a little bit further, and some people will be able to do it as long as they know where they're going and can do it and plan in advance. And by not having as many people go to the city dock, you can maybe eliminate some of the congestion issue that occurs at peak times of the day. As part of the strategy, as it's been talked about before, doing a pricing structure on the meters, a timing structure on the meters, so that you have people get incentives to park further away because of the pricing, and that's again an information issue as well. And then we have some issues that we think are concerns about the current plan that's there. So for example, one of the concerns is the phasing of the project. Right? We thought that the way we were developing, and I think all the groups were developing, are some short-term initiatives and longer-term initiatives. Short-term being like, up to 1 to 3 years, and longer-term being more than that. And what we're hearing, I think, here is that the redevelopment of the Hillman garage may be the first step before the city dock is done, and that seems a little bit inconsistent. For example, if you have the information and electronic component of getting people away from the city dock and still maintaining the number of net parking spaces available for people, you could actually start implementing that sooner than when the city dock is being reconstructed. So there is a great reason to be able to, that ties into what everybody else has talked about, that is access for programming, access for water access, maritime access, if you could do that. Mobility is a primary issue. You need to be able to allow people to get down to the city dock, down to the boats there, and part of that concern, as Eileen just mentioned, is whether that area can be used for access impaired people to be dropped off close enough that they can still get down to the water access and the boat access. And part of that concern is buses. we have a concern, our parking group and people have a concern that the turnaround where the parking is right before the Harbor Master House may not be wide enough to permit a large bus to actually make that turn. And the alternative also seems difficult because the alternative would be to go down to Prince George Street, and we're not sure a big bus could make that turn either. So it really takes some design people and engineering people to design that properly and focus on, you know, the details are really what it'll be. But being able for buses to make that turn is critical to everybody's access, the programming, the narrow time, and the parking group as well, and the access group. We had a concern of the Uber and Lyft drop-off area. Yeah, that is enough to clog up the whole city dock if all those are coming into that same turnaround where the buses are. And quite often, Uber, Lyft drop-off places have been removed from the high traveled access areas and developed a little bit further away. So I don't know where in the design here, but that would be it. And we have electronic vehicles around the city that could, if there was a defined place for Uber and Lyft to drop people, those electric vehicles that are being run throughout the city nowadays could easily ferry people down to the city dock. Part of the concern about the elevation discussed for the city dock and Campbell area is whether that would impede access for handicapped or other people to get down to the boats. I'm assuming that the ramps we're talking about may not be large enough for vehicular traffic, even the small electronic vehicles. So that's got to be addressed. And lastly, the issue is fire truck and other emergency service access. That has got to be addressed also. They'll be able to get down to the same area. And they may have a same or similar concern with turnaround if you had a big ladder truck or something that had to turn around in that space. So that's, again, a design, not so much design, an engineering issue that would have to be addressed. Anything else, David? Okay.
Ron, thank you. And fire truck, all of that has been looked at in this area to make sure that works. Rodney, I'm sorry, Ellen.
After you're finished, I would like to just make a
The Burtis group really didn't have any concerns. We did have some questions needing clarification, primarily about what the grade change would be and how extensive the grade change would be in the area of the Burtis house. Bryce explained it to me, and we think that what they've come up with is really, really adequate.
Wonderful.
Was that it?
Not really good, but really adequate.
I forgot. Dave. Let me, Dave, the Resiliency Group.
Thank you. My name is David Barker, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Resiliency Group, what's left of it here. We think that this is a very good initial approximation, and we would endorse it on that basis. But unfortunately, my role is to be the Cassandra, I think, tonight. And we have been dealing with spatial representations here in these designs. But I want to talk to you for a minute about temporal change. The rate of change is itself accelerating, and sea level rise is turning out to be a much worse problem even than was projected just a few years ago. And so this inevitably creates a large cone of uncertainty, actually in the fairly near future, but certainly a few decades from now. So we'd like to urge that this be considered part of a process. This is not a simple product, one-off, do it and it's done. But we need to build in from the very beginning an adaptive management process, a learning, active learning process, so that over time that we can't today project that adaptations can be made. So this is not a white elephant 5 decades from now. Having said that, I think that the most urgent thing from the resilience point of view is that the flood protection elements of this plan must be scalable so that over time they can be scaled up to the point where what is now projected to be, say, maybe 4.5 feet of sea level, if it turns out to be 7 or 8 feet, the entire concept will need to be elevated further, and that needs to be somehow built in from the very beginning. That's all.
David, thank you. And Ellen?
Yeah, I just wanted to make another comment relative to programming. Because we did really hit on the plan that has reducing the community engagement that now occurs down in the dock area. That dock area could be a wow. It has a potential for being a wow area where people come that are the diverse people who come say, wow, there's nothing like this anywhere else. And so the program committee, which really deliberated on a number of fronts and made specific suggestions for things that should happen in that green space that you've got up there, felt that none of that was taken into consideration at all.
That's not
It is a gathering place for the community now that gather there, and reducing the side of the park when people gather there for the lights parade, for New Year's Eve, and for the tug of war, and for all the other celebrations that occur, probably doesn't work so well for community access. And then providing some really exciting wow features, one that can go through on a year-round basis. One that we did suggest, and keeping with you, is actually a large pond where kids could sail boats, and then it could be frozen for ice skating in the winter. That those are the kinds of things that need to be accommodated in the design. And maybe they can be, but we didn't know where they would be accommodated. That's all.
So all of the recommendations, particularly of programming, Ron Jaroshel worked to put a detailed report together on the programming recommendations. All of those go in the document themselves, as well as the anticipation. Leo, did you want to add to that?
I did, just real briefly. I think Ellen's point is well taken. You know, there's a lot of elements we'd like to include in the plan, and the design team made a conscious decision to avoid showing those right now, because the goal for us is to provide space for those program elements, include them in the design brief that says these are things we want to make sure can happen here. And we'll see how the selected design team does in achieving those, but they need to be listed and included and not lost,
yeah, they will.
So that we can make sure that, you know, the goal's met.
So, Leo, can you take this for just a second? So, thank you very much. I just want to point out that there will be a meeting next month, and that one of the things we had hoped tonight, but there was so much enthusiasm and activity about the drawings, we didn't really get a chance for each table to go over their report, which will be included in the implementation strategy. I have reports from all these groups, so your team leaders will be contacting you to make sure those reports, which will go right into the implementation strategy, reflect what you want to say. And we will also be contacting several of you, particularly the livability group, as we do outreach for other parts of the city. Again, we're going about 15 minutes to Ward 1, and you are more than welcome, but thank you so much for tonight, and see you next month.
That radius.
What?